Welcome to the Weights and Plates podcast. I am Robert Santana. I am your host, along with Trent Jones, my co-host.
Hello, the other Robert.
That's true. Did we talk about this on an episode, or did you and I talk about this?
I think we did.
Yeah. Today we're going to do part 2 of how do you want to word this?
So this is basically like what we meant to do.
Yeah.
When we started the last episode, we're like, all right, we want to do a podcast about intermediate and advanced programming and some of the concepts there. And then we started rolling and we're like, shit, we got to cover like post-novice programming first, because there's actually a lot to unpack there before we even get to this. So Here's part 2, but really like what we intended to talk about the first time.
I think that my big intention here was to talk about, we always talk about linear progression, but I think the theme here is nonlinear progression, and that's what ends up materializing for most people for various reasons.
So basically, when does progress stop being linear and
why?
become and why? Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
I think when people hear us talking about linear progression or reading Starting Strength, the book, or listen to Rip's videos, the description of it is that an untrained novice will progress linearly, add weight to the bar, every workout on the squat, every other workout on the bench and press, every workout on the deadlift, and then every other workout on the deadlift and power clean, and pretty steadily on the chin-ups. Every workout, if you're doing a pull down, it's a little bit harder to progress chin-ups incrementally, especially with your weight fluctuating, especially if you're a skinny guy gaining weight. But basically, the whole theme is you're adding weight in a predictable fashion. You know that you're going to add weight the next workout, the next time you do the exercise, and this is going to go on for the foreseeable future. So just to tie up what we were talking about with novices, there are assumptions to the novice linear progression, and such that it required Rip to write the famous A Clarification article.
Yes.
Which I recommend everybody read. I'm not going to go into that, but I will give...
that one gets sadly overlooked by a lot of people who are familiar with the book, Starting Strength. A Clarification is like a must-read. If you've read any of the Blue Book, go and read that too. It's on the Starting Strength website.
If you get easily offended, just don't read it then. But, he points out common reasons why people fail to make progress attempting to do the program. Keyword is attempting, because the reality is you're not doing the program. YNDTP, which is the image on that article of those letters.
Yeah, right.
And he wrote this 10 years ago when the book was about 5 years old, and he was frustrated with people claiming that they were doing the program and not getting results when they were in fact not doing the program. Then he took it a step further, and a couple years back, and I've known him for a while now, it could have been 5 years back, there was an article called The 3 Questions, which I would call a clarification 2.0. So it's almost like you got to read both of those back to back. And in that, what he's really going over is the assumption. So the assumption with linear progression is that you are eating well, you are sleeping well, and by eating well, you're eating a sufficient number of calories, a sufficient number of carbs, a sufficient number of protein grams, and that you are essentially well-nourished, ideally in a caloric surplus of some sort, even if it's a mild one, or at the very least maintenance, if you're a heavier person, and that you're sleeping, probably 6 to 9 hours a day, depending on the person. The purists will say 6 is too low, but some people can do it on 6. There's a variability with sleep. Generally, 8 hours is the magic number. Anybody who sleeps 8 is going to do well. But, typically what I find is if you sleep less than 6, you're not going to do well. So just in general. But
not going to work.
So sleeping well, eating well, you're not stressed out. You're not, running and doing another sport on top of it. Your life is dedicated to lifting. You might have a job that's not too physically demanding. You might have some normal responsibilities that people have, but the most physically demanding thing you're doing is the lifting. Your diet revolves around the lifting. Your sleep revolves around the lifting. You're managing your stress levels well. Basically, the stars are aligning. Now, the more novice you are, and remember, a rank novice has never touched a weight before. I'm not talking about the guy who's fucked off in the gym and accidentally squatted 315, which was me when I started it. I was a
right.
I was a trained novice. I did some training. I tried to push weight on the bar before I did it. So I wasn't a rank novice. A rank novice has never touched a weight. So, a rank novice could probably fuck off for, the first month and make progress. And then if he's still eating 1,800 calories to keep his abs, Then the second month, he starts missing 85-pound presses when, he's 19, male, and, 5'8", you know what I mean? That's not heavy, by the way, or I've seen a guy struggle with a 70-pound press,
Yeah.
The numbers are relative here. The point is, you start missing prematurely. Typically, a rank novice can follow this program for 6 to 9 months and make progress if he's never touched a weight before. A trained novice might do it anywhere from 2 to 4, depending on how far along he went fucking around.
Right.
So if those assumptions are not met, then you are not doing the program. Let me repeat that. If those assumptions, good diet, good sleeping, good stress management, are not met, you are not doing the program.
Yeah, and I want to clarify something for RIP, since we don't
3.0.
have that. Yeah, the clarification 3.0. No, this is actually all in there in that first A clarification article. But it basically, if you are not fat, for lack of a better term, you need to be eating probably in a caloric surplus. Probably. Okay.
Most likely.
Yeah. Now,
especially
if you are
NLP.
Yeah, absolutely. So, and that's because the amount of resources that you need to recover from this work, like you're saying, especially towards the end of LP, is enormous. And the other thing is, we've talked about this in prior episodes, when you're first doing this as a novice, you're putting on more muscle mass than you will at any other point in your training. Mm-hmm. Right? That first year of training, you've got a certain amount of capacity to put on muscle, and it's much higher than it will be in your second year of training, in your third year of training, and beyond. And so you think about that, it takes a lot of freaking calories to build, a pound of muscle. Mm-hmm. I don't know how many that is. Do you know how many calories? Has anyone ever tried to figure that out?
Nobody can quantify. It takes muscle gain is so cumulative,
Yeah, sure. I don't even know how you'd begin to measure that.
Because you can eat a ton of calories and just put on body fat and then add the muscle over a 2-month period. You know what I mean?
Sure,
so
absolutely.
It's very hard to quantify.
But I would say that, it's on the order of, if we just had to kind of finger to the wind estimate, it's thousands and thousands of calories it would take to build a pound of muscle.
In conjunction with weeks and weeks and weeks of training.
That's right. Right. There has to be the stimulus there. But I say that only to mean that there's some people that get this idea. They're like, they're skinny fat. Mm-hmm. Or they're maybe a little bit fluffy, and they get this idea that they're going to get like really lean, or they're going to lose significant amounts of body fat while they're doing the novice linear progression. And that's just not my experience with most people. No. They will get leaner for sure, but that's not the focus of the program.
No.
It's building the base so that you can do that later in the future with dieting, where it's really going to make the difference. But yeah, unless you are really truly overweight with a large amount of adipose tissue to lose, you cannot just be eating at maintenance and expect to get serious results from this program.
No, you absolutely cannot. And that's why most attempts at this program result in nonlinear progress. You're not eating enough. You're not sleeping enough. Okay, you've done those things. Well, now you're stressed out. That's a little trickier. I'm not a psychologist or a life coach or whatever the hell people deal with that. But, if you have, 6 kids and a stressful job and, an asshole boss or
right.
Things aren't going so well outside the gym, you might miss lifts that you might get if the stars were aligned. Those things are real. Yeah. And I find that in some people, they want to downplay that. Like, that shouldn't have mattered. I should have got it,
Right.
So let me give an example. This weekend, I went for a hike, probably 5 miles. And it was first mile up was just a continuous grade. So it was like I called it like an ice cream swirl because you were just going around and around and around for a mile, And I'm heavier now, so it's harder to do,
It's like you're on the stair climber.
Yeah, I need to do that. I need to do this more regularly. I was not happy with my conditioning, but I got it done. And then I had to walk down, so a lot of downhill walking. So, I know what's going on. My hips are getting beat on. My tibialis is getting beat on,
A lot of eccentric work there. Yeah,
exactly. Yep. So, sure enough, the next day, my side of my glutes were sore, and my tibialis muscle was sore in my quad and my calf, right?
Yeah.
So, I happened to have a big squat the next day. I was supposed to squat 405 for 5 on Monday. I had hit it 2 weeks before, but I was high on a couple, so I was going to repeat it. And also for confidence, I went into the last one kind of scared. Anytime it's over 400, I get nervous, and it's been probably almost a year since I got up there, to that much. So, I did it again and I got 4. And, I sank all of these. I think one of them might have still been high. The last one was high, which I missed high. So you can already know what would have happened if I sank it.
Right.
And I wasn't mad. I was like, well, I hiked, 5 miles. I hiked 5 miles and, some of these muscles are fucking sore. Some of them were not. My quads were good and strong, but my hips were a little bit tired. And I felt that in the warm-ups. I'm like, man, if I didn't hike, this would be an awesome day because everything else feels great because I think my volume week is dialed in, So, I'm going to try in 2 weeks and I'm probably going to get it as long as I don't hike the day before, or do something crazy. But, doing this for so many years, I find that a lot of people, like when they miss, and, sometimes this is due to psychological or emotional immaturity, they'll miss and then they'll think they shouldn't have missed, even though they did something to add stress to their body in the days prior. And then it's your fault as the coach. You must be the programming, and well, you're not doing this is demanding shit. You're lifting heavy weight,
Right.
It's heavy, it requires a lot of your resources, a lot of your physical resources and your mental resources, but mostly your physical resources. And if you use those doing something else that's even moderately hard, it might interfere if you're going for a PR. This matters less when you first start out. As you go along the adaptation curve, month 2, month 3, month 4, now it really starts to matter. Month 5, month 6, and onward, it starts to matter. You're not going to, get in a fight with your girlfriend till 5 a.m, sleep 2 hours, and, get the next 3 sets of 5 with 5 more pounds than 2 days before. You're going to miss, most likely. Or you might injure yourself. That's possible too. And all those things matter. It's just because it didn't happen in the weight room does not change the reality that is cumulative stress,
Yeah, exactly.
And so is the program. That's how muscle building and strength acquisition works. It is cumulative stress from repeated workouts. So if you are adding more to that from something outside of it, you're likely to fuck up your workout. And that's fine. It's not a programming error. That's
right.
Just the fact that's a recovery problem.
Yeah. So I like, we've talked about the SRA model. Mm-hmm. And if we were to graph that out, if you go to the starting strength seminar and you see the SRA model graphed out, it's kind of it looks a little bit like a sine wave,
mm-hmm. Yep.
But that moves upwards over time, right? So, you start at point 1, you have some stress, and then, you have a recovery period and you have an adaptation, and the next point is now higher on the graph because you have more adaptation, right, over time. Well, you can graft on that. I said the sine wave. I was giving away what I'm about to say now. Where the sine wave comes in.
Some people might not know what that is. What's a sine? I know what it is. What's a sine wave?
So a sine wave it moves. It kind of looks like a U shape, and there's like an upside down U after mm-hmm. that. So it mm-hmm. makes a perfectly smooth cycle from point, mm-hmm. From the 0 point to the next 0 point. Okay, so if you graft onto the SRA points, right? We've got this sort of a bunch of dots on a graph moving upwards and to the right over time. Mm-hmm. You can graft onto that a second model that I think was first outlined by the Soviets. I don't know a lot about the history, but they call it the 2-factor model. Mm-hmm. And the 2-factor model simply says, some people call it the fitness fatigue model.
Oh, I remember that.
And I think it's a helpful mental model when you graft it onto the SRA cycle that we've talked about. Mm-hmm. So the fitness fatigue model, very simply, it says that, day 1, you go in the gym and you stress yourself with a workout. So immediately in the next 24 hours, your fitness just went down. Mm-hmm. Because you're fatigued, right? So 2 things happened. Your fitness went down, so that's the bottom of the little U shape, right? So mm-hmm. your ability, your adaptation has not happened yet because that happens during the recovery period, right? Mm-hmm. So your fitness sort of temporarily goes down because you couldn't simply like get to the end of the workout and say like, oh, I'm just going to do the workout again.
Exactly.
And it's not going to go exactly the same as it did the first time, right? Because you're already fatigued. Mm-hmm. Duh. Okay, at the same time, your fatigue level is moving in the opposite direction. It's an upside down U, right?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Now, over time, you recover from that stress, your fatigue dissipates, and by the time you get to the next workout, I'm talking about a novice at the beginning of the program right now. You get to the next workout, and your fatigue is pretty much 100% dissipated, and your fitness level has gone up just a little bit from the beginning of the first workout, right? And so over time, we get linear progress. And along that linear progress, fitness, fatigue, right? Fitness goes up when the fatigue is dissipated. But there's a breakdown that happens. And that's exactly what you just described in your example. Shit happens in life. I'd say even if it doesn't happen in life, even if your training is going perfectly and you've got all of these factors we just outlined dialed in to a T, eventually what happens is in this model, the systemic fatigue of all of these lifts starts to accumulate, and you get to the next workout and you just have not dissipated 100% of that fatigue anymore. Mm-hmm. You're in the hole when you're starting out. So your fitness level has not been realized, right? Now you've sort of put in the stress into the equation to get a certain amount of adaptation, but you can't realize all of that adaptation because you have this fatigue that has accumulated, right? So I just think that's a helpful mental model to use when you're thinking about programming, because when you get to be an intermediate and advanced lifter, you have to really pay attention to this stuff. It's not just SRA, it's also managing fatigue over that time period too.
Yeah, which, I don't know, when I'm listening to it, it sounds kind of like the same thing. You know, you can think of those fatigue periods as the recovery period, right?
Exactly.
And then the adaptation periods when you're recovered and you're adding more, essentially.
Yeah.
And those U-shaped curves get wider as you advance more, meaning it takes longer, right?
Right.
But I think that before I go on into intermediate advanced, the theme to clarify, the theme to take away from this is that no matter how much your imagination tells you that you can do 65 different things and improve at all of them at the same time, that's not reality. And I'm not going to enable that reality, and that's what really this is all about. You know, I feel like we live in a world, and I don't know if this is CrossFit or maybe a sign of the times, but certainly CrossFit has a lot to do with it in the context of training. People think they're going to lift heavier, run faster, perform better sexually, make more money, raise 10 kids, and be an expert martial artist on top of it all. And the thing is, you have a finite number of resources, and you have to allocate them responsibly if you want to improve at certain things. You got to pick your battles there, you know. So if you're going to pursue maximum strength, then you're probably not going to want to pursue maximum endurance or, maximum fighting capability, right?
Yeah. I run into this. So I coach a number of people who are in their 50s, later 50s, 60s, and sort of the younger end of the baby boomers, the later end of that generation. And I always think there was something. Mad Men was onto something when they were depicting the baby boomers in that show. I don't know if you ever watched that show, but all of the characters in that show that had kids, like, what do they always do with the kids? The kids, they always sat them down in front of the TV. They're like, hey, y'all go watch TV, and then, that way we can get a big drunken argument.
Yeah.
Because that show's miserable. Yeah. But there's something that there's something that happened in our modern, I don't know if this is due to marketing, if this is due to advertising, but it's certainly there that people believe that they can be all these things, and that 60 is the new 40, right?
Yeah.
And it's like there's it's a denial of our natural aging process. It's a denial of our mortality, frankly. I think that maybe what it comes down to at the end of the day is people just will not admit to themselves that they're going to die. And part of that is that it's, we decline. We have a peak and we have a decline.
Yeah. Eventually we're going to decline.
Yeah, and then you eventually decline into nothing. But it's going to happen whether you accept that or not. It's going to happen. So maybe just maybe you should get around to working on that. But I've definitely run into this idea, and it just compounds the older you get, right? When you're 40, 50, 60, all of these factors become harder and harder to ignore.
Yeah, a trained 60-year-old is obviously better off than an untrained one, but trained 60-year-old,
100%.
yes, trained 60-year-old still can't do a lot of what an untrained 20-year-old can.
That's right.
Untrained 20-year-old can go out drinking all night long, not sleep, and then go to class and function all day. A trained 60-year-old is going to feel that for probably several weeks.
Yes, absolutely.
Or at least one. I don't want to exaggerate here and get the one, one guy that writes, "Hey man, it only takes me a week." What my point is that there are limitations that come with aging, but
Yeah.
we're not even talking about age here. I might get a 30-year-old that wants to lift heavy, wants to ride mountain bikes, wants to raise 5 kids, wants to sleep 4 hours, wants to work 12 hours. It's just not going to work.
But I hate to break it to you, maybe this is about aging, because when you're 30, guess what? You're not
21.
You're not 21 anymore. There's a big difference, right?
Yeah.
You can still do anything you want, but you can't do everything you want.
Yeah, well, the difference with somebody in their 20s, because I've dealt with this phenomena across the age spectrum. People in their 20s that I run into this with, they have even more attention deficit than people in their 30s, in general, and they want to do 65 different things. They want to, they want to make money, start their career, and they want to sometimes have kids, or chase a mate, depending on the person, obviously. And then they want to lift heavy, but then they want to do other extracurriculars, at the same time, mountain biking, hiking, running, whatever.
Yeah,
swimming,
CrossFit, BJJ, et cetera,
BJJ.
et cetera.
Yeah, they're trying all these activities at the same time. And then you'll run into a situation where you might get somebody who is a very gifted novice, right? And they may or may not have done something before. Usually these people have done something before, because if they're gifted for this sort of thing, they have an inclination towards physical activity in general, hard physical activity. And, they'll come in with a high baseline, lifting what most of our people will lift after a whole year, day one, right? That happens. And they'll run their linear progression, and it will come easy, and they'll surpass everybody in the gym until it's no longer easy. And then suddenly recovery becomes an issue. And in a lot of cases, it's been my experience that they lack the emotional maturity to deal with the shortcomings, whereas the weak novice has already had to deal with that from the beginning, because, the guy who starts out with, a 95-pound squat and has to work his ass off for a 275-pound squat is different than the guy who starts with 225 and ends with 365,
Yeah.
And the second guy, or female, I've seen this in both sexes, tends to take it a little bit hard when they miss for the first time, because the first time they miss, it might be a 400 squat, or a 450 squat, It's like, well, what the fuck? Why am I missing? It's like, because you're not recovered. Well, no, I didn't recover before and I got through it. It's like, well, you're gifted,
Right.
So, eventually, people always, criticize, the genetic freaks don't want to do the work, or the people that take drugs aren't doing the work. No, it's just they start running into the problems later. They're lifting a lot more than you and I are when they run into these problems. You and I run into these problems. Like, when did I start having squat problems? 275, And then there's guys that have squat problems after 200. I've seen that before, I was
going to say 240 for me, probably. Yeah.
For me, it was like 275, and then I, was able to keep going, but I've seen that, these people that have pretty good runs, when it gets hard later and they get to a point where they're intermediate, I'd say that's the weed out phase. That's where the guy who wanted to squat 500 or 600 pounds, when they first started, well, not 600, but let's say somebody wanted to squat 500 or deadlift 6, or had these great aspirations to get real strong because they got to 4 so easy,
Right.
Suddenly now they're pissed because they're missing reps, and then it's like, well, you drink all weekend, or you stayed up all night, or, you went on a hard hike, that was uphill for 6 miles, and then back.
Right.
Or, you fought with your girlfriend till 5 in the morning and didn't sleep, or you worked all night, and didn't sleep. They got away with it when they were novices, in part because they've done stuff before and had a high baseline, in part because they just have a high baseline, and in part because it's the first time they've ever progressed anything. So it gets hard later, and it gets hard when they're lifting weights that people spend years trying to lift.
Yeah.
And they think, well, I got here so easy, therefore it shouldn't get hard. I should be able to do this. And it's like, well, says who? Well, here's the reality check. You're not able to do this. That is the reality.
Right.
But then they'll turn around. It's your fault. It must be the programming. It must be your fault. And I'm not saying that I'm perfect. I make mistakes. We all make mistakes. But
sure,
the theme I've seen in these situations is that I've seen this trend towards this inability to be honest about the reality of the situation in terms of recovery influencing whether a lift goes or not, whether a workout goes good or not. Then there's also, then comes the temper tantrum of, well, I've gotten this before. What the hell? Why is this heavy now? I've gotten this before. I couldn't even do this weight, and I got that weight before. I've gotten weaker. No, you haven't gotten weaker. That's that fatigue curve you were talking about, the recovery curve. You're still in recovery. And that gets wider as you advance. And if you throw in other stressors, it gets even wider.
Yes.
And you might even detrain because you fucked around too much outside of the gym. That starts to matter the further along you get. So the thing about intermediate is it's far less predictable than novice. The longer you're in the weight room trying to add, trying to progress, trying to get towards your genetic ceiling, if I may, the longer you're on that journey, the less predictable it becomes.
Right. Yeah. Every little factor becomes more weighty. Did you eat well 3 days a week, 5 days a week, all 7? At some point, every little factor that you can control becomes more and more important. If you get advanced enough, you can't afford to eat poorly for a couple days and expect to, hit your training numbers. And then, of course, you got to layer on everything else that happens in life with, the stuff that you can't control, right? And that's it's funny you mentioned these things because I think in general I deal with an older crowd. For them, it tends to be it's the same exact concept, but it's things that tend to be more outside of their control. It's like, stress. Work was really stressful. We had something blow up in the company. I had to be on the phone till 2 a.m. with my team, leading the process of getting that problem fixed.
Yeah, I get a lot of that too.
Yeah, or it's like my kids are sick or something's going on. Mom's sick and the kids, and I've got to take on more family responsibility than I normally do in addition to my job. Right? Okay, it doesn't matter. It's those are still big influences, even if you can't control them. Right? You didn't ask for that. You didn't choose to do those extra things, but it's still a factor.
You bring up a very interesting point because I never really tried to. You're right. This is about aging, and not in the way that we were talking about earlier. But I just had a light bulb moment when you said that. That the response to this, the reaction to this, is very different among age groups. Somebody in their 20s hasn't figured out they're not Superman yet, and this is where I, as a coach, need to be patient. So this is quite the realization here for me because I've identified it. I've gotten annoyed with it. I've worked through it with people, and now I'm starting to see that the mentality across different decades of age changes. If I get a 25-year-old lifter who makes it to intermediate, past early intermediate, or even the end of Texas method, where things start to get hard and less predictable. Once things become less predictable, especially if they're gifted, they have not yet learned how to effectively deal with failure, which is something that I probably didn't deal with well at that age either.
Right. Yeah, me neither.
Probably a little bit better than most. I fucked up a lot of things at a young age, especially in academics, anyways, at that age in the 20s, you haven't, some people, this varies depending on where you grew up and your life experiences, but if things have gone fairly well and you're in your 20s, failure is not something you're going to deal with too well, and your emotions are all over the fucking place. If you're a male, you have higher testosterone, you tend to get pissed off a little easier at shit, make bigger deal out of things at that age,
Yep.
And, your patience is a lot lower because you want everything now because things tend to happen faster, when you're going through that transition, from teens to 20s.
Yeah.
So then all of a sudden, you might have your first injury and it's like, what the fuck happened there? And you might not get injured at all, so I'm not saying everybody's going to get injured doing this. I was lifting wrong and got injured in my LP, and then I got coaching later, and I haven't, knock on wood, had an injury like that again, and I hope I don't. And I won't bring that up on the air again because I don't want to jinx myself. I happen to be a superstitious man. But my point is that when you get somebody who's gifted and has not really had a lot of setbacks in life, and typically this is more common in young people because they haven't been on the planet that long, just wait. Eventually it gets hard for everybody. But, you get a younger person in their 20s who hasn't dealt with failure yet, starting to miss reps. They don't handle it very well, and it must be the programming. And this is why you get a lot of people at that age program hopping. I did it. I'm sure you did it.
Yep.
A lot of program hopping, and then, eventually you arrive at the conclusion that you're fucking this up one way or another, and you grow up, pull your pants up, and get it done. Then in the 30s, you still see some of that as well. There's other things going on, but it's still fairly new. Working a full-time job, maybe taking care of a house, possibly having a kid.
Right.
Just depends where you're at. But in the 30s, there's a layer of responsibility that probably wasn't there, or in the 20s just started to be there. And you start to see some limitations a little more, but I tend to see some of the same type of thing in the early 30s where, okay, maybe they started later, I started later, started in my late 20s, and now it starts getting hard for the first time. And then also the thing in this particular sport, and I brought this up, I don't know if I brought it up here, but in other places I brought this up. When I was growing up, Michael Jordan was a gifted basketball player. There'll never be another Michael Jordan. He's amazing, greatest of all time. I still argue it, Don't write me emails about that.
Let's be real.
He's still the best. I'm from Chicago. Come on. I'm always going to have a bias. I will deny.
Have you seen 90s basketball? It's a freaking hack fest out there.
Yeah,
and he still is the best.
Yeah, I mean, it's, I will deny reality when it comes to Michael Jordan being the best at basketball. But anyways, I'm partially obnoxious, partially serious. But anyways, it was accepted, right? But for some reason, it has been my observation that in the weight room, specifically in powerlifting and bodybuilding, there is this idea that hard work will get you to the elite. And it just blows my mind. You've seen it. I've seen it.
Yeah.
And, again, your older guys, they're not worried about this shit as much. But the younger lifters, probably 20 to 35, 18 to 35, that age group, they tend to think that, if they just keep working hard, they're, going to squat, deadlift 600 if strength is their goal, or they're going to look like a bodybuilder or fitness model if that's their goal. There's this idea that hard work is going to get them the results of, the pros, or the guy in the magazine,
Yeah. Do you think some of this is social media driven? So I was asking you the other day about, have we seen, are we just now, I say just now, in the last, 10 years or so, seeing the strongest women ever? Because
probably.
Women haven't really been, they weren't, as far as I know, women weren't really into powerlifting in the 70s.
It was less common.
It was big. Yeah, I'm sure it was less common. But nowadays we have a lot of young women who are into powerlifting and do it from a young enough age to maximize their genetic potential. And you've got ladies like Amanda Lawrence out there squatting 5 something, deadlifting 6 something, something like high
Kimberly
fives.
Wolford.
And she's, she's like, I don't know, 5'5", 180 pounds, we're not talking about super heavyweight here, we're talking about a very normal looking, but freaking jacked woman.
Yeah.
But the thing is, the fact that, okay, she's the best powerlifter in the world in her weight class, right now. Maybe she has a couple of endorsement deals, but she's not pulling down millions of dollars. She's not getting interviewed by ESPN, as far as I know. She's not on the front, the first segment of SportsCenter. Let's put it that way. Like your equivalent athletes are in football, basketball, baseball.
Yeah, exactly.
Right? And so I think maybe that plays into it. There's this illusion that's like, oh, well, I see her Instagram and she commented back on one of my comments I left her. And it's like, she's approachable. And we don't put her on the same sort of level as the Michael Jordans of the world, because Michael Jordan is untouchable. Yeah. That dude's on Sports Illustrated magazine.
And that could be part of it. But, I remember I fell into this problem because I was not understanding the role of the drugs. And I read a lot of bodybuilding magazines, and I believe that, hey, this program's going to put 5 inches on my arms, or, I'm going to be 200 at single digit body fat, I'm close to 200 now, and I look better at that weight, but I'm not single digit body fat, I'd probably still be in the 170s if I wanted to do that,
Right.
Which is up from the 140s when I was younger, so,
Yeah.
I moved the needle there. But, once I figured out the role of drugs and how that variable is left out in much of the training literature that I read when I was younger, and not necessarily peer-reviewed literature. Most of that stuff, they actually are looking at drug-free for the most part. But I'm talking about the publications, the magazines, the fitness magazines, bodybuilding.com, etc.
Yeah.
Nobody talked about the drugs, in part because it's illegal, I understand that, but in part because they wanted to make money. It's like, oh, I did this, or, you get these actors with these 3-month transformations, and you're like, there's no way that guy built muscle that fast. I'm sure, there's some people that look like mini bodybuilders before they touch a weight and they swell up.
But dude, if you had $10 million on the line and you had like your own chef and all that, like you could do it in 3 months, right? Like if that was your only job was just to train.
No, I wouldn't get the $10 million. That's what would happen.
Right. Yeah, exactly.
No, that's called testosterone and other drugs. So, I understand it. I would look at other lifters and I'd be like, oh, that guy's pulling 7 or 6 something. If I just keep putting in the work, maybe I'll get there. I'm trying to think. With the powerlifting, with the weight on the bar, I knew that I could pull 500 if I worked hard. I knew that I could squat 4 if I worked hard. I didn't really think of the press. I accidentally got stronger at. Never in a million years did I think I'd press 225, and I did it last year. I'm about to do it again soon. But the deadlift, I was so frustrated for 3 years, and part of it was bad programming, and part of it was this phenomena too. I'm watching all these other lifters just warming up with it, and
right.
It's getting in my head and making it more frustrating than it needed to be. And I probably created a mental block for myself that made it also take longer. But it was like I should be hitting 500. And looking back at my training history, sure, if I coached myself with my knowledge now, I probably would have got there a little bit quicker, certainly. But I was definitely falling into that trap of spending too much time watching other lifters on Instagram, looking at other lifters in the gym, and then setting these unrealistic expectations for myself. Like, I should be able to do that, I should be able to do that, and that hard work is the answer. And even before that, before I understood the role of drugs, I thought I can gain all this muscle, in a short amount of time. And it must have been my program. And I got to remind myself of that when I'm dealing with this. So the same thing happens. I might get some very strong lifters that'll look at even stronger lifters and say, why am I missing and that person's not? Or why am I working so hard and that person's not? Because, now lifting light weights for endless sets is the trend. And it has been for a long time because, you know what, it probably has better client retention. Let's be real. As a business person,
It's easy.
If you never make your clients grind, they're probably going to stick around longer, because grinding sucks. Nobody likes missing and nobody likes killing themselves every workout. But, I get that a lot. Why am I doing RPE 10 and all these other people are never doing RPE 10? I'm like, because they're fucking it up and the drugs are doing their job in some cases, But the point is that, there's a lot of this comparison game going on. And like you said, your older lifters had meetings, all this other crap. I get that all the time. I had to travel across state lines. I missed 2 workouts. I had a meeting, and then I had another meeting, and I only ate once that day. And I guess I got to start over next week. That's how the older lifter deals with it, in my experience. The younger lifter will direct his or her anger at me.
Yeah.
Because I didn't give him a magic program, and this other coach's client isn't having these problems. And that takes me back to a chiropractor I met in Los Angeles. Cool guy. He went to a gym called Bodybuilders. I never went there. It was a nice gym. I just remember that.
It's aptly named.
Yeah. And I was doing low bar squats at the time. And I said that I liked them because they were easier on the knees. And then he's like, yeah, they could be harder on the shoulders, though. And he was right. He's not wrong about that. And it depends on the lifter. Not everybody's going to get their shoulders fucked up from it. I still haven't, knock on wood. And I think you're fine still. You can still do it. I've seen some guys get to a point where they can't anymore. So, at first I rolled my eyes at them. But now that I've coached people, there are some people that just can't hold it that low. And that's fine. But That's not what we're talking about. I said something about some exercise I was doing. I don't know what it was. I kept bugging out my trap. And I said, oh, this guy at the gym or these guys at the gym are doing X. I can't even remember what I said, but I remember him looking at me and saying, don't ever make any assumptions about what's going on in somebody else's body. You have no idea, And that resonated with me. I took that in. I didn't put any resistance up there. His name's Max Levin. I believe he still works out there if anybody wants a chiropractor in Los Angeles. Great guy. I'd still go there if I lived there. But that piece of advice stuck with me. And especially when later on I got hurt, I'm like, I thought about what he said, and I'm like, I'm walking around hurt. At this point, I'm functional. Nobody knows I'm hurt, and I'm in here squatting and deadlifting, But I'm hurt, and I'm working through it. I got better. But it was an important lesson, and I try to explain that to people when they try to compare themselves to others. It's like, you don't know what that person is going through, what hurts, they're only posting out workouts they completed. How many times have they missed,
Right.
It's kind of like gamblers only talk about when they win. You know what I mean?
Yeah, exactly.
So
highly curated.
there's a lot of assumptions behind this, like, okay, that person never grinds. Why? Because their videos on Instagram don't show them grinding and missing a rep? Or because you didn't see them grinding? Or that, I'm always tired. That person's never tired. How do you know? Maybe some people, like, okay, you got guys like John Patrizio. He's my favorite with this. He squats slow when it's fucking easy,
Yeah. Oh, I was just about to say that. People have vastly different speeds. I see people that on the extreme end, everything looks fast until they miss.
Yeah. Yeah.
And you get to know them as a lifter over time, and you realize when they are moving slow. But if you don't know them and you just see them in a video compared to other people, you're like, oh, that was fast. How did they miss? Like, well, it's just the way they are.
Exactly.
Some people are the opposite, very slow. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So, when it comes to intermediate and advanced programming, the less novice you become, the more unpredictable your training becomes. If your life is more unpredictable, and as you get older, your life in terms of stress, recovery, adaptation becomes less predictable. You might have a shitty day. It's not like you're 20 years old in college and you're eating dorm food and sleeping. Your week's pretty predictable, and all you got to do is not get trashed and you'll probably be fine.
Right.
As you get older, things become less predictable, and therefore your progression will become less predictable. Also, intermediate programming becomes more individualized as you become more advanced, and advanced programming is the most individualized. So
yeah.
The idea that, okay, I'm going to create a perfect custom template for you that's going to work from beginning to finish, that's flawed, because I can't do that for you. The other coach you're looking at firing me for can't do that for you. And the 3 coaches you're going to hire after him can't do that for you. And that's because it's highly individual. It's not going to play out perfectly, So if you are a perfectionist, this is probably not for you. In fact, anything that is hard is probably not for you, unless you
Right.
are going into it to get over your perfectionism.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, and personally for me, part of the reason why I've enjoyed strength sports, besides just training, but actually doing strength meets, is because it's just for me. Like, I'm never going to be the strongest guy at the meet. Right? Just not in the cards for me. Mm-hmm. It doesn't matter. It's almost better. If I was like maybe one of the strongest guys in the meet, that might actually be worse.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah.
But I know going into that, like, it's not going to happen. Right. So now that I got that off the table, then it's like, okay, what am I here for? I'm here to beat myself. I'm here to do better than I've done, right? Mm-hmm. And it's, that's part of what attracted me to the strength sports in the first place, is that I didn't have to compare myself to have a good meet and enjoy myself and get some sense of satisfaction out of it.
Yeah, I agree. Same here.
I'm glad you kind of gone down this road, because I think we need to give a little bit of an outline of what do we mean exactly when we're saying intermediate programming and individualization and all this. There's a lot to say about this to start with. This is multiple podcasts worth of content.
Part 3.
Part 3, Part 4, Part 5. You could have a whole show dedicated to intermediate and advanced programming, and Andy Baker should probably do that one.
Yeah.
But
most people aren't going to get there.
Right. Yeah. So don't worry about that. But I think we should give people a sense of like, what do we mean? Okay. So we've talked a lot about the novice program. I think you got that one down. Mm-hmm. We've talked a little bit about the common early intermediate programs. One of those is Tex's method, right? We've talked about that. you have a volume day and you have an intensity day on both ends of the week, and you've got a light day in the middle. Okay. There are variations of that. There's old man Texas, there's heavy, light, medium. They all more or less look like that. Now, if we kind of move down the adaptation curve a little bit more, and we have someone who's now a middle intermediate or late intermediate, what does that look like? What does training look like? Well, there's basically a couple of variables that really matter here. I'll give you my outline. I'll see if you agree with me. So I think, first of all, what we're looking for is to produce a tangible PR over a period of time. Now, that could be 2 weeks, could be 3 weeks. We're probably talking about 3 weeks to a month for a later stage intermediate. And the PR, first of all, you have to get out of your head that the PR is going to be more weight on the bar than you've ever done. That may not be the goal. It may be more reps than you've ever done for a given weight. Right? A double becomes a triple becomes a 5, et cetera, et cetera. But in order to create that PR, we know the stress recovery adaptation formula, right? We have to put a sufficient amount of stress into the equation, right? So how do we do that? We do that by manipulating volume and intensity primarily, right? Those are the two biggest things, right? So we'll have alternating weeks, let's say, of volume and intensity, so that we'll build up volume over a period of time at a relatively lighter loads. We're talking maybe 70 to 80% range, just as a generally. And then we transition from a heavier, a higher volume week or weeks into a less volume, higher intensity week, right? And then that transforms again into more specific things. If then it becomes more specific. Like, what kind of PR are we trying to produce? If we're talking purely strength here, then after that period of time, we may do a period of time where we're doing very low volume and very high intensity, and we're approaching a PR. Right? That might be things like doing practice singles with back off sets of 3s, right? At very high intensities. Okay, so we're basically moving from high volume to high intensity to produce a strength PR. And throughout those phases, what we're trying to do is basically accumulate more stress by waiving the two factors that we have. Okay, so that's kind of just a really broad strokes outline of how later stage programming is going to go. Now, here's the thing. Along the way, you've got the individualization factor, which is, what do you need as a lifter? And you're only going to know that by understanding where you failed in the past and identifying where your weak spots are. And that's where things like the second tier factors come into play. I categorize them as like, managing your volume and intensity are probably the most important factors, or the primary factors of progress. And the secondary factors are things like exercise selection, and then frequency, how often you're doing these lifts, that kind of stuff. And that becomes very individual, right? If whatever your technique problem is, you might need to have different exercises to address that. Or if it's a muscular problem, if you just need some more size and development in one area, that's where you pick certain exercises. And then again, frequency plays into that too. If you're going to be doing a powerlifting meet and you're going to be benching and not pressing in competition, well, then you better be benching more frequently because you need more practice, because that's your sport, or something else, right? We can go on and on and on, but I just wanted to kind of lay out a very broad strokes idea of what we mean when we say intermediate advanced programming beyond the sort of stock programs. Now, would you agree with me on that?
No, I would totally agree. And one thing I'd like to say there is, if you legitimately get to a solid to late intermediate or advanced status, then you're specializing in powerlifting or strength lifting.
Yes.
Or,
yeah.
Possibly Olympic weightlifting if that's what you're doing. But you're basically, that's your sport at that point, which means other shit has little room in your schedule, in your life. You can't go into competitive fighting and be an advanced lifter or intermediate lifter.
Yeah, that's a great point. Most people, like when I'm talking about that PR phase, most people never get there because what ends up happening is that some other physical activity or pursuit takes precedence for periods of time. So we might we might have a few months of the year where we're driving towards PRs, and we might get, for that short period of time, we might get into a more advanced, longer cycle of training to produce a PR. But then they're like, yeah, hey, I want to go mountain bike because it's warming up, the sun's coming out. I want to do a bunch of mountain biking now. Okay, cool. But that means that you're not going, like, all of a sudden you've taken a step back in advancement.
You have.
Because you can't add that stuff, right? So they basically take a giant step back in their training, and in order to try to get there again, they've got to go through that again.
Yeah.
So that's the way most people end up, or they don't have any desire to do that, and they're just kind of do general physical preparedness. They're like, well, I want to work on some conditioning or do a little bit of body weight stuff, calisthenics, whatever.
Yeah, and this is generally why most people don't get that far along the adaptation curve, because it's not for everybody. Very few people.
No.
There's a point of diminishing returns, people, and that's covered in many places on the internet and the books. We've talked about it, and you've got to really like doing this to get there. I mean, I'm reaching a point. I've been in the weight room for 23 years, 22 years, and I've been training like this for about 8, almost 9. And, I went on this hike, and it was hard to go up, and it was harder than it was in the summer when it was hotter out, and you would think it'd be even harder. But I'm heavier now, and I'm adapted to strength training, and I'm not really doing anything more than, keeping my step count up in terms of conditioning. So I don't know that I want to, keep making this the exclusive thing that I do for much longer. I'll probably run out this next PR and, try to shake it up. I have a mountain bike, and, I live outdoors, so I'm definitely walk enough, but, I need to do that hike more because that was disappointing. And I'm not bad at endurance activities, or I haven't been in the past. So this was kind of a shocker to me, but it goes to show, I'm not squatting 2 to 3 times a week anymore, deadlifting 2 to 3 times a week anymore. Right. I'm squatting once a week. I'm deadlifting once a week. My volume's low. My intensity's high. So, I need to, probably throw in some conditioning to at least get a better baseline. But at the end of the day, if you are pushing the limits of your strength, no matter how creative of an imagination you have, you're not going to change the reality that you can't do other shit. I mean, it's just how it is, like it comes back to exercise versus training. If you decide you want to exercise, and you got to put PRs out of your mind, and, they might come, they might not. But if you are an advanced lifter, who's also, and let's say you're a very strong one too, that are a couple standard deviations from the bell curve, there's no room for other shit if you want more PRs. There just isn't. You're approaching ceiling effects, and everything matters. And other stuff is likely to injure you or fuck up your recovery and, prevent you from PRing, especially if the PR you're chasing is 1RM, because 1RM is the least predictable, because, there's the general position on this is, volume develops strength, intensity, meaning singles and doubles, expresses strength, right? I think there's muscular adaptations that happen when you do a 1RM. It's, not sure, it's probably a small percentage of it, but there's muscular adaptations there, because as soon as you take weight off and go back to 10s or 5s or whatever rep range you're going to start your next volume accumulation phase on, it feels like feathers, and that's also neuromuscular. I'm acknowledging that too, but the idea that a 1RM is purely neuromuscular with no muscular adaptations is just not, it's flawed, I think it's an oversimplification of what's going on. But if your goal is 1RM and you are competing in powerlifting or strength lifting or even maxing out at the gym, the stars really have to align for that. And more so when you have gotten to ceiling effects and you're putting on maybe 5 to 10 pounds or maybe even less per year. You just don't, like, if you look at world-class lifters in the top 5, their meet performance might be higher one meet and lower the next. They're still winning, because they're the top. But, like, even if you look at Olympians from Olympics to Olympics and look at Olympic weightlifting, because Olympic weightlifting, sorry guys, it's a strength sport, because what determines the winner? The amount of weight on the bar, right? Yep. Sure, it's not 1RM powerlifting, maximum amount of weight you can pick up, but they're lifting a weight quickly, catching it, and standing up, whether it's a snatch or a clean. That's essentially what's happening. And if you look at these guys, they might not necessarily lift more from one Olympics to the next, and that's something you got to prepare for. You really got to like this. You can't get to advanced status, compete in powerlifting meets, and then expect to participate in other sports at the same time. The sport has taken you to a point where if you want to continue to progress, it has to be your number one activity, and there's no room for other stuff.
That's right.
Not beyond a light level. Like, I need you. I want you to walk. I want you to get some conditioning in. But I don't want you training for a 10K. I don't want you fighting competitively for BJJ. I don't want you doing 6 hours of mountain biking. There's no room for that type of thing. There's room for, a daily bike ride to work, a long walk at night, a jog, there's stuff like even in my situation, I could do some conditioning and still progress. But, beyond, a light amount of it, I'm going to interfere with my training because I'm an advanced lifter. Now, I don't know if I want to get stronger. My situation's different. I'm talking about if 1RM is your goal, number one, get it out of your head that it's going to go up every time you test it, because it's not. Yeah, especially it's not. As you
so much
advance
has
more.
to go right. Yeah, exactly. And it's everything. The ceiling effect with technique, I feel like people don't appreciate as much either. Like I spent 18 months chasing a press PR. Press is my best lift. I had pressed, I missed 235 or 230. No, I missed 230 or whatever that is. The closest kilo equivalent is 232 maybe in a meet. And it took me like 18 months to press 238 or something after that. Right now, it wasn't because in training, I'd actually hit heavier doubles and triples leading up to the times. I tested it, I think, 2 or 3 times after that over those 18 months. And I had heavier doubles and triples in my training leading up to those tests. But it didn't happen. Why? Because the press is freaking difficult to get right on one rep when you've got a heavy weight in your hands. If you're a half inch off in your bar path, that can make the difference.
It's the press and the deadlift is where I see that the most.
Yeah. Exactly. Deadlift too, right? I missed a 500 pull at a meet because I was just forward, and I did it again 6 months later. No problem. I don't think I was really any stronger. I might have been a touch stronger with my doubles on the second attempt, leading up to the second attempt when I got it. But it's more importantly, my positioning got better. So, so all these things matter. I would say one other thing that just to drive the point home. Let's say that you're a fairly advanced lifter and you're working on a 3-week to 4-week microcycle. Okay, you're still probably not what we would call advanced, but you're certainly a late intermediate at this point. Doesn't really matter. You're pretty dang advanced. Okay, so that, in other words, what I mean when I say microcycle is that it's going to take you 3 to 4 weeks to produce a single PR, right? Which is not a 1RM. That just means that a PR in whatever range that we're working on at that moment. Could be a set of 5, could be 3, 2, whatever. That means that, let's say you train 4 days a week. Okay, it's pretty common. So it's 16 workouts. You cannot miss any of those 16 workouts in order to hit that PR. Okay, so be honest with yourself, right? If your goal is to have, if you have lofty goals here, over your last 16 workouts, how many have you missed? Okay, because if you missed any of them, you're just not going to make that progress. And as the coach, if you miss 2 out of those 16 workouts, then I don't know what happened, right? I don't know if it's like, was it the fact that, did we not have enough stress because of the missed workouts, or was it just, did we miss the window of adaptation, right? Did you adapt to the work you had been doing and then you started to detrain a little bit? The point is you can't know, right? So you have to be perfect on the stuff that you can control. And realistically, it's like, I know I can't make 16 workouts in a row right now.
No.
I don't have room for that in my life, right? I couldn't do it. Not right now. So you just got to be honest about that. That's what it looks like. That's what it looks like.
Yeah, absolutely.
There's a reason professional athletes and very high level athletes, like they have a whole support network so that it's never, they don't ever have a reason to miss a workout because they've got people handling other things for them.
So that's a good point. This really goes back to the central question of, do you want to train or do you want to exercise? Now the first year of training is going to be the best because you're going to go up predictably, quickly, and you're going to see the changes fast. If you want to continue to see more changes, build more muscle, gain more strength, you become an athlete after that novice phase. You're basically committed to being an athlete, and that is no different than playing pro. They get paid a lot though, but playing pro sports,
Right?
And then you're working a full-time job on top of it. So, you're trying to basically play a pro sport on limited resources, whereas they're playing a pro sport on a lot of resources. I wouldn't say unlimited, but they, have a great deal of resources, people cooking their food, people, driving them places, and, again, they make millions of dollars. So the point is you're trying to, essentially play a pro sport while you're working a full-time job, possibly providing for a family and dealing with other things, right? So your trajectory is going to be much less linear, and your improvements are going to be slow and steady beyond that first year. And I think that goes for anybody, but especially somebody who has other stuff going on outside the gym. And because of that, these guys that are pro basketball players, pro football players, they're not going to go play another sport and risk getting hurt. It's because they get hurt, they can't go play basketball, they lose their contract, right?
Yep.
So it's kind of the same thing. We're not condoning, going into this and trying to seek advanced status. It's not all it's cracked out to be. Trent and I really like this stuff, so we keep doing it. But I think we found that people get into this because I want to get stronger, I want to look better, I want to not have a gut. It's the most common reason that people hire us. Occasionally you get somebody that wants to, get as strong as humanly possible, and they'll put in 4 or 5 years. But for the most part, middle of the bell curve guy or gal will hire us and say, I want to look better and get stronger. And you can get a great deal of that done in the first year if you do the program. But then beyond that, if you're going to try and keep pushing beyond that, you're committing to an athlete's life, on top of the normal life of a working class human being, if that's what you are, And if you have somebody to do all that stuff for you, that's great. We'll definitely take you as a client. But for the most part, it's not what we get. We typically get people with jobs, families, other things. And, the athlete's life is not for them. So then it becomes, quasi-exercise, quasi-training for most people. And that's fine. You'll hit a PR randomly every so often, and just don't think about it so much. You're not an athlete. That's really what I advise people once they get past novice, if they make it that far. Because most people are constantly resetting because, they miss a workout, they get sick, they have to go somewhere, et cetera, and they're, rerunning cycles of novice or possibly doing intermediate for exercise ADHD purposes, But, very few people actually get out of novice. And when they do, if you have a life, it's going to be quasi-exercise, quasi-training, and the progress is going to be slow, steady, less predictable, and, you'll probably hit, some PRs every year, and that'll be fine, but just understand it's less predictable, it's less linear. That's really what we're trying to hammer home here. And that's not a bad thing. Just,
it's not a bad thing.
What I try to do as a coach is manage people's expectations. I find myself spending more time on that than anything else. And that's how I'm managing your expectation. You're going to have a good, easy first year. And then the second year depends on how serious you want to take this. And then beyond that, you better really like this if you want it to be as, I guess as linear as possible, meaning you're trying to minimize the nonlinearity that inevitably comes,
But keep the gains train rolling.
Yeah, but if you're going to have a life and stay in the weight room and you want to just, keep doing these exercises for the rest of your life, but not necessarily become an advanced lifter, then understand it's quasi-exercise, quasi-training. And, you're going to have periods where it's a fucking joke and you squat one day, you deadlift one day and hope for the best, but, you really aren't too preoccupied with it because you're raising an infant or whatever the hell's going on, or you want to run a 10K, whatever it is, it doesn't mean that you have to stop doing these exercises. It just means that, it's no longer serious training.
Right. Exactly. And, and I will say this, something that's kind of interesting, because I've been in that mode more or less for most of the last 2.5 years, at least. Mm-hmm. I've found that I generally will have, 6 months out of the year spread throughout the year, but like a total of 6 months where I have good solid runs at my training, where I'm steadily adding weight. My compliance is high. My outside stressors, the rest of my life is just kind of fixed for that period of time, and so I can really be predictable with how I hit the weights. Well, and I'll find that I'll have that, and I'll have a training result at the end of that. It's not always I'm going to go to a meet. Sometimes it's a meet, but sometimes it's not. Sometimes it's just that I hit some like the heaviest that I got on that training cycle.
Yeah.
And then something happens in life and things change, right? But I've found that even though I have to, because things change and I miss time lifting, or I just don't, for whatever reason, I can't recover from that heavy work anymore. And so I'll switch to something else. I'll do a little bodybuilding stuff for fun for a time period. When I come back and I have another good period of time to have another good run, over time, it's like you said, it's not predictable, but over time, year over year, I come back stronger. Not every single cycle. It's not like a predictable linear thing, but over time, I have gotten stronger bit by bit. And I'm training much in the same way you do, right? Like it's not the main focus of my life.
No.
But I am still trying to add. I'm not just screwing around when I go to the workout. I am still trying to train. It's just that realistically, my training cycles are shorter, and my runway is shorter, and it's like in little bursts throughout the year. And so that I think there's something to that, right? I think that's a valid way to train too. Once you get past, you got to put in the work. You got to go through that novice period of training. You've got to give that everything you got. You need to go through, Texas method or heavy, light, medium, or some sort of good early intermediate program. Give that all you've got. But you'll get to a point where you can do this. And if you're not too wrapped up about the results, then, you'll find that you can get stronger bit by bit, year over year, for a good long while.
Just, I think the big takeaway is just understand that, you only have so many resources available to you, mental, physical, emotional, etc.
Yeah.
And you have to allocate those to different things, kind of like, financial budget. You have dollars, right? Dollars by resources. And you have to allocate those dollars towards certain resources. If you have a lot of dollars, you can, buy a lot of things, right? If you don't have a lot of dollars, you can't buy a lot of things unless you take out a bunch of debt, which sucks up your dollars in other ways. But the whole point is, in lifting, you can only recover so quickly. You're only going to age. You're only going to age more, not less. And, can only allocate so many hours of the day to the training. So you have to keep that in mind. You're not a superhero. You're not going to be a world-class power lifter and a world-class runner and mother or father of the year and, run for mayor of your town all at the same time, I mean,
Yeah.
I keep coming up with new ones every time I say this, but that's the theme, right? You have so many resources and you have to pick your activities wisely. And if you're at a point where you can't progress your 1RM, but you have all this other shit you're doing, you're going to have to make a hard decision, And if you're at a point where your novice linear progression is over and training is more demanding, but your rest of your life is more important, then it's simple. And the solution's the same for everybody, whether it's the world-class lifter that, can't squeeze out progress because he's trying to do something else at the same time, or the busy parent, or, whatever, the busy business person, then you're going to have to understand that curve's wider. It's going to take you longer to hit PRs. They're going to be infrequent. And the most important thing is they're going to be less predictable. So again, if you're a perfectionist, this is not for you, especially beyond that beginning, this is one way to get over perfectionism, because the thing is,
it's humbling.
It's very humbling. You do not get to decide when it's there. And that becomes more and more true as you become more and more advanced. You don't get to choose. All you get to choose is whether you're going to put in an effort. What comes out of that outcome is not up to you. You can do a lot of things to maximize your odds. I mean, that's what you're doing. You're playing with odds. You're like, okay, if I program it this way, it will hopefully trend in this direction, and I should be somewhere around here. That's really how you want to think of it. Not, this is the perfect program, and it's going to be executed perfectly, and I'm going to hit every lift and not miss a single rep, and then I'm going to hit this exact 1RM based on this exact calculation. No, this isn't accounting. The human body is far less predictable than that. You can generally predict where you're going, and that's what we're doing when we program.
That's right.
It's a general blueprint of what you think is going to take you somewhere, but there's no guarantees. And again, if you're a perfectionist, this is probably not for you. So my advice is don't be lazy. I hate saying lower your expectations, but manage your expectations, I should say.
That's right. Yeah. Focus on the process, not the results.
Exactly.
How about that? Just focus on executing the process.
And keep good notes too. I mean, I wrote hiked for 5 miles yesterday, hip sore, shins are sore, knees kind of achy. And I wrote that next to this 405 for 4 squat. I wrote missed 5th rep high and still missed. So, later on when I'm having, I don't really have them anymore. When I was younger, I used to have them. But let's say I have a meltdown for whatever reason. It's unlikely because I don't give a shit about my 1RM squat anymore. Yeah. But let's say that I get upset about it. I can go back and look like, oh, yep, didn't recover there. Was gone, drove to Chicago and back there. There's all the notes are there. Don't just write your numbers down. Write down all the other shit that's going on,
Exactly.
Because it helps you get out of your emotions later when you try to get pissed off that things aren't moving. It gives you some sort of reason why that's happening,
Right. That stuff is golden over time. You might find some trends, so when you're looking back in that journal.
Mm-hmm. And that's data. It's subjective data, but it's there. It's it's a yes no thing. Did it happen? Did it not? So
yeah, exactly. Exactly.
It's useful. So yeah.
Here's my advice. If you're working with a coach, number one, be honest about what you want. And know that it's okay to change your goals. You might get into this. You might get 6 months past Texas Method or whatever, and you're like, man, the fire's not there anymore to train like this. Mm-hmm. Tell your coach. Be honest about your goals. Manage your expectations. Right, you can do that on your own, but be honest about your goals, and then do what the coach says. Right, because we have a reason. As long as you're honest and we're on the same page with what your goals are, we have a reason for doing what we are asking you to do, right? Our programming is not magical. It's not perfect. What it is it's an iterative process. We have sort of models that we know work, but we're also reacting to the information that occurs when you go and you start executing the program, right? Things might fail here or there, and we react to that. We adjust the programming accordingly. Where the problems happen are when there's a mismatch between your goals and the programming, right? So if you got into this in the beginning and your goal was to look trimmer around the waist, and you're now a year into training and you've done all the hard work, right? And you're still trying to push for PRs on the bar, well, that might be in conflict with your goal, right? And so that we need to make sure that the programming is matching that. So be honest about your goals and then just do the program.
Yeah. I think we unpacked a lot there. It's an important topic to hit. It's something I run into a lot. Just managing expectations is important. And hope everybody learned something. That's all I got there. Do you have anything to add before we close out?
Oh gosh, yeah. Well, I think we ought to cover, we ought to talk about maybe some specific tips and tricks that we have for programming at this level in a future episodes.
Yeah, let's take
there's a lot of interesting things you can do, to kind of keep progress going, and a lot of different models you can experiment with.
Yeah.
And they're a lot of fun to talk about. So yeah, we'll dig into this a lot more into the specifics. So if you tuned in and you were looking for programming advice hey, how many sets and reps you're going to do? Well, this wasn't the episode, but we will get there and we will talk about that in future podcasts.
Excellent. Thank you for tuning in to the Weights and Plates podcast. You can find me on Instagram at _Robert_Santana or weightsandplates.com. And the gym is at weights __ and _ plates on Instagram.
Excellent. I hear that you have a seminar coming up at your gym.
That's right. I have a training camp, a starting strength training camp with Grant Brogy, I believe is how he pronounces it.
All right, yeah. Are y'all doing squats and deadlifts?
Yes, squat and deadlift camp. So definitely come out. We still have space.
Great. Yeah. I just hosted one of those a few months ago with our good friend Darren Deaton in Fort Worth, and it's great. So the squat and deadlift camp, basically you get just lots and lots of hands-on time with a coach So if you're having issues with your form, or you think you're there, but you kind of want to fine tune things, or it's just a total disaster, it doesn't matter where you're at in your training. If you want to get your squat and deadlift fixed, go to these camps. They're a great time to get tons of hands-on time. All right, we'll talk to you in a couple weeks.